I'll leave at dawn.
Not alone.
"I'll leave at dawn," said the rejected mail-order bride. The rancher barred the door. Not alone. Wyoming Territory. Early winter. A week before Christmas, 1887. The first snow of the season had not yet surrendered to the ground. It clung stubbornly to the ash-gray earth, melting into thick mud where wagon wheels had churned the road into ruts mixed with broken ice. Wind swept down from the hills, sharp and restless, as a single battered stagecoach struggled up the path toward Hartman Ranch. The wagon finally stopped with a weary groan of wood and iron. Eliza Moore stepped down. Her coat was heavy but faded, the wool thinned at the elbows from years of wear. Mud clung to her high boots, the seams split and mended more than once. She carried a small canvas bag slung over her shoulder, light enough to be lifted with one hand, heavy enough to contain her entire life. She paused only long enough to steady her breath against the cold, then walked straight to the porch. The wooden boards creaked under her weight as she raised her hand and knocked 3 times. The sound echoed inside the house, hollow and final. Footsteps approached. The latch turned. Caleb Hartman opened the door. He was tall and broad, wrapped in a weathered leather coat over a rolled-sleeve flannel shirt. His beard was thick, dark with streaks of gray. His eyes, cold blue-gray like winter steel, studied Eliza from head to toe. There was no greeting, no curiosity, no warmth. "Who sent you?" he asked. Eliza reached into her bag and pulled out a folded letter. The paper was creased from travel, but the red seal remained intact. She held it out without hesitation. Caleb took it, scanning the lines quickly. His jaw tightened. He recognized the handwriting at once, his sister-in-law's careful script. The woman who had taken it upon herself to help after his wife's death. He folded the letter sharply and handed it back. "I didn't order you," he said. "There's been a mistake." The wind hissed between them. Snowflakes drifted sideways across the porch. Eliza did not plead. She did not ask questions. She simply stood there for a moment, then inhaled slowly, as if steadying something inside her. "Then I'll leave at dawn," she said. Her voice was calm, not bitter, not broken. She turned and stepped off the porch. Caleb watched her walk away. There was something unsettling in the way she moved, no panic in her stride, no desperation in her shoulders. Just quiet acceptance, like someone long practiced in leaving places she was never meant to stay. He exhaled sharply. No matter the mistake, he couldn't leave a woman outside in winter. "There's a storage shed behind the house," he said. "You can stay there tonight. I'll figure something out in the morning." Eliza paused, glanced back once, then nodded. She didn't thank him. She didn't bow her head. She simply walked toward the shed and pushed the door open herself. Inside, the space smelled of old wood and dust. Straw lay scattered across the floor, a few empty sacks stacked against the wall. It wasn't comfortable, but it was dry. It would keep the wind out. Night fell quickly. The moon was pale behind thick clouds, the wind still worrying at the edges of the building. Later, when the house had gone quiet, Caleb stepped outside again. He carried a folded wool blanket, a thick slice of bread wrapped in cloth, and a tin flask filled with warm water. He placed them just outside the shed door and left without knocking. Moments later, Eliza opened the door. She stopped when she saw them. Slowly, she picked up the flask and pressed it to her chest, letting the warmth seep through her coat. Her eyes closed briefly. No one saw her then, standing alone in the dim light, holding warmth like something fragile. Upstairs, 2 small faces peered through a frost-clouded window. "Is she a gift from Santa?" Lily whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "Did he send her early?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe," he said, "but why didn't Papa smile?" Downstairs, Caleb stood near the hearth, frozen in place. The words cut deeper than he expected, not because of the woman outside, but because of the hope in his daughter's voice. The kind of hope he had been trying, desperately, to protect them from. That night, Caleb did not sleep. He lay staring into the dying embers of the fire, hearing echoes of laughter that no longer lived in the house. He remembered the promise he had made to raise his children alone, to be enough, to never risk loss again. But tonight, that promise felt old and fragile. Morning came under a heavier sky. Fresh snow covered the ground, the wind sharper than before. Eliza stepped out of the shed, with her bag on her shoulder and her scarf tied tight. She was ready to go. She opened the door, and Caleb was standing there. No rifle, no axe, just tired eyes and a voice rough from a sleepless night. "You can't leave," he said. Eliza stopped. "I won't stay where I'm not wanted." Caleb held her gaze for a long moment, then exhaled. "Then stay," he said quietly. "Not as my wife, but not alone." The wind stilled, just for a breath, and something unspoken began. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, turning the frost on the pine needles to glistening diamonds, when Eliza stepped out of the old storage shed. She had slept better than she dared hope, wrapped in the heavier blanket Caleb left for her, and the lingering warmth of the bread and water kept her body from morning's worst bite. Still, the chill pressed against the ranch house like a reminder that winter was not finished with them yet. As she made her way toward the kitchen door, she saw Caleb already at the chopping block, preparing firewood with his usual quiet precision. He paused when he noticed her approach, but did not look at her directly. "Eliza," he said simply. She paused, breathing in the cold morning air, and met his gaze. "I know I'm not staying under false charity," she began, steady and respectful. "If I stay, I work." Caleb blinked, just once, but it was enough. That was not an answer he had expected. Most women in these parts, especially those far from home and alone, would accept a place to sleep and a warm meal without conditions. But Eliza was different. She stood there, hands tucked into her coat pockets, not looking for pity. She was offering herself as a partner in labor, not as someone to be looked after. Before Caleb could respond, an older woman approached from across the yard, making her way up the slope with a basket in hand. Her back was bent, but her eyes were sharp as flint when she saw Eliza. "Morning," the woman called, her voice rough like worn leather, but warm beneath the surface. Eliza stepped forward politely. "Good morning, ma'am." The woman set down the basket, eggs, fresh from her hens clustered at the edge of her own property, and held out a small pot of hot tea, steam twirling up like the smoke from a campfire. Eliza accepted it with thanks. The woman studied her for a long moment, eyes lingering on the way she held herself, feet planted firmly despite the cold, and then said to Caleb, not unkindly, "That girl walks like someone who's been left before." Caleb's jaw tightened, though he turned back to his woodpile to hide his expression. He did not understand the woman's words fully in that moment, not the depth of them, but they stayed with him, like a shadow at the edge of a firelight. Eliza took a sip of the tea, letting the warmth spread through her limbs. As she moved toward the wash basin outside, the older woman followed. Soon she was passing cloths and soap. "Eliza, is it?" the woman asked. "Yes," she replied. "When you come through trials," the woman said, "you learn more than just how to survive. You learn how to stand." Eliza's eyes softened, and she began scrubbing a bundle of clothing that had seen better days. As she worked, the older woman stepped back, giving her space but kindness. Cloth met water. Soap met stain. Eliza moved deliberately, but her gaze drifted toward the horizon and then back to her task. After a moment, Agnes, as the woman had introduced herself, turned to her. "You want to tell him he doesn't owe you anything," Agnes said, "but you're also telling him you're not a burden. That's something few around here would manage." Eliza paused, considering it. Then she looked down at the clothes she was washing. "I never expected love," she said quietly, eyes not meeting anyone's. "I just hoped not to be discarded again." That thought, spoken aloud without apology, carried something heavier than even the cold morning air. And when she looked at Caleb, not with pleading or need, but with honesty, her eyes held something he had long forgotten he could see in another: resolve. She stepped toward him, clean cloth bundled under her arm. "I'm not here to be saved," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here because I choose to stay." There was no dramatic flourish in her words, no demand, not even a hope too loudly stated, just a choice, simple, unadorned, and entirely her own. Caleb could only watch, feeling an unexpected stirring inside him. He had lived with people before, family, neighbors, hands working cattle, but none had come into his world and said, without fear, what she had just said. Not because she was defiant, but because she was honest. And that honesty, that willingness to choose her own path, was the first spark of light in a winter that had felt unending. The Wyoming sky hung low, blanketed in soft clouds that threatened more snow. The ranch was quiet that morning, with the hills wrapped in frost and the air carrying the crisp scent of firewood. Inside the house, life had begun to shift in small, nearly invisible ways. Eliza never forced herself into the rhythm of the Hartman household. She did not declare herself caretaker, nor did she press herself into moments that weren't hers. She was simply present. She helped prepare meals without taking over the kitchen. She noticed when Thomas's boots were falling apart and quietly mended the seams. When Lily's favorite doll broke, Eliza showed her how to twist straw into something new, rough but loved. At first, the children remained watchful. Thomas, ever cautious, observed from the corner of rooms. Lily, more open-hearted, began to reach out with tentative trust. One late evening, the wind howled low across the valley, rattling the wooden shutters. Eliza was cleaning up near the fireplace when she heard soft cries coming from the children's room. She stepped to the door and gently pushed it open. Lily was curled in her bed, small hands clutching the blanket, tears on her cheeks. Eliza sat beside her, careful not to startle. "Did you have a bad dream?" she asked softly. Lily nodded, lip trembling. Mama was calling. But then the wind took her voice. Eliza didn't promise anything she couldn't give. She didn't speak of heaven or ghosts or miracles. She simply pulled the blanket tighter around the little girl and began humming a lullaby, an old tune her own mother once sang. Low, steady, familiar. Thomas stood in the hallway, silent. He didn't speak. He only listened. To the tune. To Lily's breathing slowing. To something settling that had been uneasy for weeks. The next morning, Thomas was up early. He sat at the table with a scrap of paper and Caleb's ink pen. His handwriting was rough, the letters uneven and large, but he focused with a seriousness that didn't suit his age. Later, Eliza found the note slid under her bedroom door, folded carefully. Just 3 words inside. "Stay with us." No name, no explanation. But when she unfolded it, she held it to her chest for a moment before placing it carefully into the pocket of her dress. That evening, as the fire snapped in the hearth, Thomas approached Caleb. "Did you tell her to go?" he asked. Caleb looked up from the saddle he was oiling, caught off guard. "No, I didn't." Thomas's gaze was steady. "Then maybe she stayed for us," he said simply. "She stayed even when we didn't ask." Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked past his son, through the window where snow was starting to fall again, and saw Eliza outside with Lily. The little girl was sitting on a stool while Eliza carefully braided her hair. Lily kept turning to see, laughing as she tangled the strands again on purpose, turning the braid into a mess. Eliza laughed with her, playfully scolding. It wasn't a sound of obligation, it was joy. Earnest, fleeting joy. Caleb set the saddle aside and walked into the hallway. From the drawer in the old writing desk, he pulled out a folded envelope. The paper had yellowed, edges soft from handling. He opened it slowly, a letter he had written long ago but never sent, to Anna, his wife. He stared at the opening line. "It snowed again today. The children asked for you." I had no answer. His hands trembled slightly. That letter had been buried under silence, under grief. But now, there was a sound outside that didn't belong to memory. It belonged to now. Children laughing. A woman's voice. A future not yet claimed, but quietly, steadily asking to be chosen. The sky was pale, almost colorless, as if winter had drained every hue from the world. A hush blanketed the land, the kind that only came before a deep freeze. The trees stood bare and brittle under a soft dusting of snow. The ranch lay quiet except for the rhythmic sound of an axe meeting wood and the low creak of the barn door. Eliza stood beside Caleb, sleeves rolled up, arms dusted with sawdust, helping stack the last load of firewood for the week. Her breath curled in the air, but sweat dampened the edge of her scarf. Caleb barely spoke, only giving nods of acknowledgement, or the occasional, "Careful with that board." As they cleared out the corner of the shed, Eliza noticed something strange. A loose plank beneath an older pile of logs. She knelt, pried it up with a small crowbar, and found a small wooden box tucked beneath, wrapped in old wool and coated in dust and frost. Caleb was on the other side of the shed and didn't notice. She paused, hesitant, then gently opened it. Inside were several letters. The first one bore a name in familiar handwriting, Anna. The ink had faded slightly, but the lines remained strong until the bottom, where the words trembled. She read the first few lines. "Anna, the snow is falling, and I hear your humming in every wind. The children are sleeping. Thomas asked if the stars could still see you. I told him yes, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself." Eliza stopped. Her hands trembled, but not from the cold. She closed the letter gently, not reading more. It wasn't hers to read. She replaced the letters, folded the cloth back, and placed the box where she'd found it. Later that evening, the ranch was quiet. Dinner had been simple, stew and cornbread. The children were asleep upstairs. Eliza stood in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. The scent of peppermint and ginger filled the room. She placed a cup by the fireplace, where Caleb often sat. Beside it, a small note in her careful handwriting. Even strong walls crack from the inside. She didn't wait for him to find it. She stepped outside, onto the porch, letting the cold bite at her cheeks, watching the dark sky stretch silent above the snow-covered hills. When Caleb entered a little later, he saw the untouched tea first, then the note. He stood still for a long moment, staring at the words. He picked up the note, rereading it. Then he sat down. The fire crackled softly. He did not weep. He did not speak. But something in his chest shifted, painfully, undeniably. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out the same letter Eliza had found. This time, he opened it. His hand hovered over the ink-stained paper, then dropped. His eyes didn't leave the window for a long while. The snow was falling again, but this time, it didn't feel as cold. The wind howled low across the open plains, carrying with it the bitter promise of a storm. Gray clouds swirled above Hartman Ranch, and the air smelled of snow and silence. It was 2 days before Christmas. Caleb pulled on his coat, fastening it tightly as he stepped onto the porch. The water trough needed clearing before the pipes froze again. He didn't think twice. He'd done this 100 times. But today, the snow hid sheets of ice beneath its soft surface. The horse's hooves clattered uneasily as Caleb rode down the hill. As he bent to check the pipe, the mare slipped. There was a sickening crunch, a blinding flash of pain, and then everything went white. Back at the house, Eliza was helping Thomas string paper lanterns across the parlor, while Lily sat nearby, coloring with a stub of red chalk. Suddenly, the mare returned, riderless, reins flapping. Thomas froze. Lily whispered, "Where's Papa's smile?" Eliza's hands tightened around the lantern string. Her breath caught. "Stay with Miss Agnes," she said quickly. "Keep the fire going. I'll find him." Eliza wrapped herself in her thickest shawl, stuffed a thermos of warm water into her satchel, and tied rope and cloth to her belt. She grabbed the lantern and followed the fresh hoofprints in the snow, her breath steaming, heart thudding. The wind stung her cheeks raw, and her boots slid on hidden patches of ice, but she kept going, past the frozen creek, through the bare-branched cottonwoods. Finally, on the edge of a shallow ravine, she saw him. Caleb lay half buried in snow, one leg twisted unnaturally beneath him, lips blue, breath shallow. The world around him was silent but for the soft hiss of falling snow. Eliza didn't scream. She dropped to her knees beside him and checked his pulse. "Caleb," she whispered, brushing snow from his face, "you listen to me." She pulled the scarf from her neck, wrapped it tightly around his leg, and used the wood from a nearby broken branch to fashion a crude splint. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from cold and urgency. With effort, she tipped the thermos and dribbled warm water to his lips. "Do not disappear on me, Caleb Hartman," she said through gritted teeth. "Not now." She wrapped her arms around him and dragged him inch by inch across the snow, using her rope and a walking stick to steady them both. Her breath came in clouds, her boots slipped, her arms burned, but she didn't stop. By the time she reached the ranch, the snow was falling heavier, and her legs felt like iron. She staggered to the porch, banged on the door with the last strength she had. Agnes opened it, gasping. "Lord above, Eliza." Thomas rushed out with a blanket, Lily holding tight to Eliza's skirt. Together, they pulled Caleb inside. Eliza collapsed beside him on the rug, face pale and wet with snowmelt. Thomas wrapped the blanket around his father, while Agnes began heating water. Lily clung to Eliza's hand, whispering, "You brought him back." Later that night, as the fire crackled and Caleb finally stirred in bed, Eliza sat beside him, wrapping another bandage around his ankle. His eyes fluttered open. "You," he rasped. "You're home," she said simply. "I was supposed to," he began. Eliza shook her head gently. "Not this time." For the first time, Caleb looked at her like he saw something more than just a stranger at his door. He saw the woman who'd saved him. Not just his life, but something deeper. That night, long after the children were asleep, Eliza sat beside the fire, hands trembling not from the cold, but from realization. She did not need saving. She had been the one to reach into the storm, to pull someone else back from the edge. And for once, she didn't feel like someone temporary. She felt chosen, essential, home. The days after Christmas passed in a hush. The ranch lay under a blanket of snow, quiet and slow-moving, as if the whole world had exhaled and was waiting for something. One morning, a familiar sound echoed through the valley, the creak of wooden wheels over frost-hardened dirt. A supply wagon rattled up the path. The driver, a trader named Milo, stepped down, stomping snow off his boots. "Morning, Hartman," he said, handing a small parcel to Caleb. Then he turned to Eliza. "Got something for you too, Miss Moore. Letter from Denver." Eliza took the envelope. Fingers chilled even through her gloves. The handwriting was tidy, unfamiliar. She opened it slowly. A job offer. Someone in Denver, a cousin of a woman she had once worked for, needed someone to manage a bookstore. Steady income. A warm room above the shop. Independence. Security. Caleb read the letter in silence when she handed it to him later that evening. He folded it neatly, then passed it back. "It's your decision," he said simply. Nothing more. No pleading, no protest, his face unreadable. That night, the house felt different. Not cold, but paused, like the moment before a match is struck. As Eliza cleared the dinner table, Thomas disappeared into his room. When he returned, he held something behind his back. "It's for your store," he said, offering her a pen with chipped paint and a worn grip. "If you go." Eliza took it gently, smiling, but something in her throat tightened. Later, Lily came down the stairs with a folded piece of paper in her hands. She placed it silently on the kitchen table, then scampered back without a word. Eliza opened it. A drawing. 4 stick figures, holding hands. One tall, one with braids, 2 small ones between them. The caption, in shaky block letters, read, "My family." She pressed the paper to her chest. That night, unable to sleep, Eliza stepped outside. The air bit at her cheeks. The stars above were half hidden behind drifting snow clouds, and the porch creaked under her boots. She stood there a long while. She remembered other nights, on the train westward, squeezed between strangers. The stares, the whispered judgments. She had been labeled by rumors and rejected by men who had never looked her in the eye. She remembered being told she was too quiet, too opinionated, not quite right. Denver would be easier, cleaner, but not warmer, not truer. Inside, the hearth still glowed. She thought of Thomas's small, hopeful eyes, of Lily's chubby hand slipping into hers, of Caleb's silence, not out of coldness, but fear of holding too tight. And for the first time in her life, Eliza Moore held all the power. She didn't have to stay. She could go, and no one would call her foolish. But she had a choice now, a real one. And that made all the difference. The next morning, she found Caleb out near the barn, splitting wood in the brittle dawn air. She approached slowly, holding the letter in one hand. He glanced at her, then returned to his work, saying nothing. "I've had places to go," Eliza said, voice steady. "But never a reason to stay, until now." Caleb stopped. His breath formed white clouds between them. He looked at her, really looked, and in his eyes, something unspoken softened. She didn't need his permission. But he gave his heart anyway, in silence. It was early January, when the snow began to melt, just enough for the icicles to tap against the window panes. Inside the Hartman ranch house, the scent of burning cedar filled the air, and soft footsteps echoed across the wooden floors. Eliza had spent the morning mending a pair of Thomas's torn mittens. She was humming under her breath, needle in hand, when Caleb came in from the back door. He looked windburned, but calm. "Can you come with me?" he asked. She nodded, setting the mittens aside. He led her through the narrow hallway, past the kitchen, and into the room at the far end, the room that had remained closed since the day she arrived. When he pushed open the door, sunlight spilled into a space she hadn't seen before. It was small, but warm. A stove in the corner, a neatly made bed, shelves empty but dusted. On the wall above the desk, a single drawing was pinned. The crayon picture Lily had drawn, 5 stick figures holding hands. Eliza saw her own yellow-haired self in the middle. Beside it, hanging from a simple nail, was a small iron key. Caleb spoke without turning around. "You once said you weren't here to be saved," he said, "that you chose to stay." She nodded, though he couldn't see it yet. "I wanted you to have a space that's yours, a room that doesn't belong to me, a key that only you carry." He hesitated. "I won't cage you. I just hope you'll stay." Eliza stepped forward. Her hand brushed the edge of the desk, then traced the edge of the key. She looked around the room again, noticing the details. A chair by the window. A folded quilt, new, but sewn with mismatched patches of fabric that had clearly come from Caleb's old clothes. A tiny wooden shelf, empty, but waiting. She turned to him, her eyes, not watery, but full. "You built this for me?" "I am not good with words," Caleb admitted, "but I know how to build things." Eliza took a deep breath. This means more than any ring," she said softly. "You didn't ask me to belong to you. You made a place where I can choose to belong." Caleb's expression was unreadable for a moment, but then his shoulders relaxed. "I just wanted you to know," he murmured. "You're not temporary." Eliza reached for the key and curled her fingers around it. It was cool and solid in her palm, but it felt like something more than metal. It felt like trust. She stepped closer to him, standing still in the soft golden light of afternoon, and said only 2 words. "I'm staying." Caleb exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. He gave a small nod and then turned to leave her to explore the room. But, at the door, he paused. "If you ever want to go, the road will always be open, and I won't stop you." Eliza smiled. "I know. That's why I won't need to leave." The sky was painted in soft hues of peach and gold as the sun dipped behind the hills of Wyoming. The snow, though patchy now, still clung to the shaded edges of the barn and fence posts, glittering in the last light of day. Inside the house, warmth and quiet excitement filled the air. There was no church, no music, no lace, just a handmade dress Eliza had sewn from cotton and wool, her hair loosely braided with sprigs of pine and dried wildflowers. Caleb wore his cleanest shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, boots freshly polished. His beard was trimmed, but not too much. He still looked like himself. In front of the hearth, Thomas stood proudly beside his father, holding a ring looped through a strand of leather. Lily twirled, showing off her flower crown made from leftover ribbon and dried berries. Agnes Crowley stood between them all, holding an old, worn book, not a Bible, but something she'd carried through years of births, losses, and beginnings. "Well," she said, squinting at the 2 of them with that knowing look, "we all know this ain't about tradition, so let's keep it simple." Caleb turned to Eliza, his hands steady. "I don't have many words," he began, "but I know this: when you walked up to that door, something cracked open in me. Not because I was ready, but because you were real." Eliza's eyes shimmered. "I didn't come here to be chosen," she replied, voice clear. "I came here to choose, and I choose this, messy, imperfect, stubborn, but true." Thomas slipped the ring into Caleb's hand, and with calloused fingers, Caleb tied it gently onto Eliza's wrist. Not a band of gold, but a strip of polished wood and carved bone. It felt more solid than anything precious. "I won't ask you to belong to me," he said, "only to walk beside me." "I always have," she whispered. Agnes smiled. "Well then, that sounds like a yes to me." There was no kiss for show, just a quiet touch of foreheads and the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Later, as the sun finished sinking, the 4 of them sat on the porch, wrapped in shared blankets. The kids leaned into Eliza's arms, their eyes starting to flutter closed from the long day. Caleb held her hand loosely in his lap, thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. The mountains stood tall around them, dark blue against a sky slowly turning to indigo. Eliza rested her head on Caleb's shoulder. "You know," she murmured, "the world didn't give me many soft landings, but it gave me here." He nodded once. "Home," he said simply. And it was. Not because it had always been, but because they had chosen to make it so. No one had been rescued, no one had begged, no one had been kept. They had all, in their own quiet ways, chosen to stay. And no one, man, woman, or child, had to leave alone again. If this story stirred something in your heart, if Eliza and Caleb's journey reminded you that love is sometimes quiet, sometimes stubborn, but always a choice, then don't let it end here. Tap that hype button,